Now let's move on to the next session, keynote presentations. Keynote presentations will be moderated by Mr. Seiji Saito, Principal of Panoramatics. He leads Panoramatics and has served as a planning and implementation advisor for many government agencies and companies. Also, he is the chair of Good Design Award Judging Committee 2023. So please welcome Mr. Saito.
Well, thanks for introducing. So welcome to WDA. I think we're so excited about how we're going to actually find outcome, like where the design industry should go. So I think I shouldn't talk that much, well, because we have like 75 minutes with the keynote and then also like a panel discussion. So I think it's great to have the keynote, the first keynote, Tim Ingold, speaking about well, maybe like you can sew in like what you saw from your perspective. And then, so we're gonna have the keynote speaker. The one is Tim Ingold, and I think the second gonna be Marianne, and then the third gonna be Anne. So please welcome Tim Ingold to have the first speak.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks to the organizing committee of the WDA for inviting me. It's a great honor. Some 300 years ago, philosophers in Europe instigated a program for universal human improvement that would come to be known as the Enlightenment. They were the designers of their day, and their program amounted to a massive vote of confidence in the power of reason, thought to have been uniquely bestowed on humankind by its creator, to emancipate human beings from the ties of earthly bondage that hold all other creatures captive, and to raise them to the heights of civilization. Over the ensuing centuries, developments in education, governance, technoscience, and medicine, underpinned by this philosophy, would gather pace, spreading around the globe with trade and colonization, and they would go on to transform the lives of millions. Now, the contribution of Enlightenment humanism to the common good is indeed undeniable, and yet this has come at a cost in two respects. First, in driving a wedge between humanity and nature, the very earth which had once offered nourishment and support for human life came to be seen as a repository of resources to be plundered, unloosing an unfettered extraction of materials on an industrial scale which has ravaged the earth and jeopardized its capacity for renewal. Second, while the appeal to universal human entitlement serves the interests of those empowered to claim it, for others, the forcible imposition of this claim has meant dehumanization and enslavement, along with loss of land, livelihood, and even life. As these twin costs have inexorably risen, what began as an agenda for progressive emancipation has morphed into a vicious spiral of environmental destruction and social injustice. Newer pathologies of humanism, such as corporate neoliberalism and algorithmic surveillance, are only exacerbating the situation, and we are already seeing the results in the form of climatic breakdown, pandemic disease, and cyber warfare. We currently stand at a conjuncture no less momentous than that which faced our Enlightenment forebears of 3 centuries ago. So do we have the courage, as they did, to usher in a new settlement that our own descendants, another 300 years from now, will look back upon as equally foundational? And if so, what form should it take? Well, two versions of a post-humanist future presently vie for supremacy. One takes the divorce of reason from nature instituted in the Enlightenment to its logical extreme, finally releasing reason from its moorings in fallible and earthbound human bodies. It would pitch us headlong into a regime of virtual reality, artificial intelligence, and fully automated work. The other points in the opposite direction, towards a planet given over to life, but for the renewal of which humans have abdicated all responsibility. Even to assume the mantle of responsibility for post-humanists of this persuasion is to reassert a now discredited anthropocentrism. Better to concede to an intelligence already at large in a more than human world that far exceeds our own. Now, neither alternative offers a viable path for humans to come. For one, human life itself, falling through the gap between outsourced minds and discarded bodies, would be headed for extinction. For the other, it would be banished to the ruins of its own creation and disqualified from playing any further role in future planetary flourishing. If there are still humans around in 3 centuries' time, what would they make of today's designs? Looking back, would they witness the courageous birth of a new settlement, ushering in an age of hope and expectation for the people of tomorrow? More probably, they would see the final collapse of an old one in a mélange of wishful thinking and despair. So post-humanism is not the answer. We need a new humanism, the newness of which lies less in a repudiation of the past than in its rejuvenation. Part of the problem with the old humanism, indeed, lay precisely in its thirst for innovation, its insistence that the only way forward is to turn one's back on what has gone before. Generation after generation, each claiming the present for itself and seeking in the name of progress to outdo the designs of its predecessors, has no sooner trumpeted the birth of a new age than its constructions have been reduced to rubble to be supplanted by those of the next. And the result, across generations, is an accumulating pile of debris. Today's post-humanism, far from interrupting this cycle of repudiation, offers more of the same, except that the age now said to be upon us turns its back not just on previous generations, but on the entirety of human history, presaging nothing less than a new epoch in the story of the Earth. Geologists unfold this story as a sequence of epochs, of which the most recent, together making up the Quaternary period, are the Pleistocene, the Holocene, and now the Anthropocene. Human beings first appear in the story during the Pleistocene as Paleolithic hunters and gatherers. That was before history began. What happens to them now in the Anthropocene, when history is supposed to have come to an end? It's no coincidence that in this geological narrative, all human history is written within the book of the Holocene, sandwiched between the prehistoric Pleistocene on the one side and the post-historic Anthropocene on the other. The book begins with the melting of the glaciers that once covered swathes of the northern hemisphere, allowing for the spread of cultivation. And it ends now that the last remnants of ice are disappearing. For some, the end of history heralds an eternity of total planetary oversight, in which the Earth system has been geoengineered by human design to run in perpetuity. For others, it augurs an era of ruination as human activities have unleashed forces of a magnitude beyond their control. But what of the people themselves? Would the idea of living in prehistory have made any sense to our Paleolithic ancestors? Undoubtedly not. It's not as though they were perched at the cliff edge of history, looking out over the vast adventure opening out ahead of them. They were merely living their lives. Would the idea of post-history, then, make any more sense to the people of generations to come? Let's cast our minds forward to imagine our descendants some 300 years from now, as the philosophers of the Enlightenment might have imagined us. It's hard to know, of course, what kinds of lives they might be living, but we may be fairly certain of three things. First, these people will still need to eat, and for this they will have to labor on the earth and under the sky to grow their food, albeit under climatic conditions very different from those we encounter today. Moreover, as an increasing proportion of the world's human population lives in cities, it is likely that for our descendants, cities will have become centers of food production as well as habitation. Second, these humans to come will still be endowed, as we are, with organs of sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell, with mouths, lips, and vocal cords, with a full complement of fingers and toes, and with a nervous system that extends throughout the body and possibly beyond. But third, the technology that has come to define our present era and that underwrites its promise finally to release humanity into a post-historic age, that technology will have long since imploded, along with all that depends on it: telecommunications, the internet, artificial intelligence, and robotics. For this technology, in order to function, placed demands on the earth and its inhabitants that were simply unsustainable. These included the enslavement of large numbers of people in often appalling conditions, to the extraction of the rare and highly toxic heavy metals required for digital operations, and the expenditure of vast quantities of energy used to fuel the supercomputers and blast into space the thousands of satellites needed to keep the whole system running. 3 centuries on, then, our descendants will find themselves depending on all the bodily senses and skills at their disposal to eke out a livelihood at high densities on an earth and under heavens that, thanks to the designs of the present, have become veritable junkyards of defunct devices. Yet, even as we turn our backs on past generations and on history itself, we continue to envisage a post-historic future that turns this reality back to front. In this vision, it is bodily organs of action and perception that are destined for extinction, while digital technology is miraculously self-sustaining. Instead of a human future that is post-digital, we cling to the idea of a digital future that is post-human. The so-called smart cities of this imagined future, for example, far from being centers of food production, will have become hubs of creativity whose inhabitants, already offloaded into their devices, will have lost all connection with the earth. They could just as well be floating offshore on artificial islands, in space, or even on other planets. And if citizens still have eyes, ears, and other organs of sense, these will have been reduced to mere portals, mediating a flow of information that connects them into a vast but entirely disembodied neural network. In this fully digitized world, fingers and toes, the original digits of the human body, will have become mere appendages, relics of an evolutionary past now irrevocably superseded. Now, this vision might seem far-fetched. but it is already impacting on the designs of the present. And let me give you an example. It concerns writing. For millennia, literate people around the world have been used to write by hand, a practice involving close hand-eye coordination in the precise enactment of micro-gestures that shape the letters or characters traced on the page. Yet increasingly today, we tap our words in a standardized typeface on digital keyboards while directing our gaze at the screen on which they are projected. Here, the links between hand and eye and between gesture and trace are broken. Writing in the sense of inscribing a line on a surface has become a thing of the past. Many adults are losing skills of handwriting diligently learned in childhood, while for a new generation raised on keypads, they are already deemed obsolete. The loss is incalculable. Banishing the expressive force of gesture and trace is equivalent in writing to silencing the expressive power of the voice in speech. A society without handwriting would be like one without song, in which words are but the liquid currency of an information economy. So after writing, will speech be the next victim of digitization? Will the affective powers of the voice be expelled from speaking, just as the keypad and screen have expelled those of the hand from writing? Will digital synthesizers be left to assemble messages from standardized speech sounds? Now, speaking and writing are precious gifts, all the more so when digital technology self-destructs, as it inevitably will. The same goes for all those skills of livelihood on which the continued survival of humans to come will ultimately depend. That's why, as I argued earlier, we need a new humanism founded on the renewal rather than the renunciation of past ways. The future is not, after all, a problem to be solved. It is a life to be lived. And living it will mean relearning how to coexist with creatures of every kind, as our ancestors once did, and as plants and animals still do, aligning our lives with theirs instead of turning our backs on them. In retrospect, the fate of the old humanism was already sealed from the moment when philosophers of the Enlightenment decreed that the future for humankind lay not in following in the footsteps of ancestors, but in turning to face in the opposite direction. With that, both human ancestral traditions and the life ways of non-human species were consigned to a bygone past. The nature that was once before us, ever birthing new life, became a nature behind us, to be conserved as heritage. And the culture that had once created the conditions for newborn nature to flourish became a reliquary of customs. Collected and classified, both nature and culture ended up in the archives, respectively, of natural history and ethnology. So if this analysis is correct, then the alternative is clear. It is to turn once again, to cast our lot with the lives of those who have gone before us and those living around us, facing the same way as they, in order to find a path together into the future. This would, of course, be a human way, and as such, fundamentally anthropocentric. But unlike the old humanism, which centered its vision of anthropos on the power of reason to raise humanity to the apex of a pyramid with the rest of the world at its feet, this new humanism would be anthropocentric in the literal sense of placing humans at the beating heart of the world itself. And from this emplaced center, humans can take on a responsibility for the life around them that is indeed exceptional. And this is thanks to their gift of speech, which uniquely grants them the capacity not just to tell the stories of their lives in the living of them, but to interweave their own life stories with those of human and non-human others into a story for the world. This story is in effect an ever-unfolding conversation, and the special responsibility of humans is to open it respectfully to beings of every possible kind. Undivided by barriers of inclusion and exclusion, the conversation is universal, and yet its universality, its oneness, if you will, is quite unlike the universality of reason. In the language of the old humanism, reason speaks with one voice and one alone, regardless of the identity or background of the speaker. But the conversation encompasses as many voices as it has participants, and each is different, continually brought forth in its solicitation of the voices of others. And every voice, positioned somewhere in the world, resounds to the depth of the region to which it belongs and of the relations it entertains with co-inhabitants. In this sense, the conversation is not so much universal as pluriversal, one in many and many in one. And it would be the vocation of the new humanism to listen to these voices and to heed their wisdom in addressing urgent questions of how to live. Thank you very much.